This is the Dallas Morning News.
Hello, everybody. Welcome into SportsDay Insider, presented by the Dallas Morning News. I am Kevin Sherrington, joined by my pals Evan Grant and David Moore. Evan's a surprise, lovely surprise, Arizona. It's a big week here for the Cowboys in the NFL. Free agency has started with a rush, and the Cowboys have been more active than they were last year, which is just, as Abe Lemons once said, son, you just scored one more point than a dead man.
Yep.
Yeah. So I don't know that we should give them too many points for being active, but at least they did something, right, David?
Well, they are twice as active already as they were in this stage last year. The soft opening on Monday and Tuesday, these moves become official Wednesday afternoon at 3, and then you kind of go from there. I think you'll still see them make some moves, but yeah, they've signed 4 guys at this point. While I understand a frustrated Cowboys nation isn't excited by any of these signings and just kind of roll their eyes and go, get back to me if you ever sign a starter. These are guys that should give them depth and allow them not to press for a position in the draft. You know, they added a couple of defensive linemen, one in the offensive line and one at running back. So I think they've covered themselves from the standpoint of, like, you don't have to take this position at 12 or you're really going to put yourself in a bind. So I think they got some potentially decent rotational players in here, some guys that give them depth. The 4 they have added outside the organization to this point are Javonte Williams, the running back from Denver, Robert Jones, the guard from Miami, Solomon Thomas, local guy, played his high school football in Coppell. They got him from the New York Jets, and a defensive tackle, and Peyton Turner, kind of a developmental defensive end, if you will. Those are their signings. Out of those, Robert Jones, the guard, will compete with Brock Hoffman and TJ Bass to see who starts at that right guard spot. Solomon Thomas, they're very thin on the interior of the defensive line. This gives them a good backup to Oso Digizua, can also play that one spot where Mozzie Smith is when you're in there and you're just looking to rush the passer. I think he'll get significant play in that defensive line rotation. I said Javonte Williams, running back from Denver. He will replace Rico Dowdle. His signing means Dowdle won't come back, but covering yourself here also means that the Cowboys are committed to taking a running back on the first 2 days of the draft. They will not get past day 2 without a running back among their first 3 picks. So they will, their approach on running back here is much like it was in offensive line last year. They let Tyron Smith walk, didn't do a lot in free agency, and then spent 2 of their first 3 picks on the offensive line. They'll take the same approach this year on what is considered a very good and deep running back class. They will get a running back, their starting running back, in the first 2 days of the draft to pair with Javonte Williams. And then Peyton Turner's a guy from New Orleans, picked higher than a lot of people thought. Outstanding wingspan, flashes some ability, but just has not been consistent. He's a guy you throw in the mix and see if you can develop. Like I said, I don't think they're done. They need to sign a corner in free agency here before that gets much deeper. And I think they also probably need to add a linebacker as well.
Yeah, there's no question about that. On one hand, this is good. These are good moves. This is what they've done in the past, where they have gone and covered themselves, so they don't have to, as you said, there isn't a really pressing need at one position. Although I would say, to me, I've been looking over guys who I think would be good for them to pick, with that first pick, the 12th pick, and trying to guess what teams might do and who would be there. And obviously there are guys that they would love to have, like a Mason Graham from Michigan, who's the best defensive tackle in the draft. But I think guys like that,
he'll be gone. He won't get to 12.
Be gone. That's right. Travis Hunter is the best player in this draft. He'll be gone by 12. Obviously, any team would want him. But at 12, I tell you, a guy who's really looking more and more like a possible pick there to me is Jahdae Barron, defensive back at Texas. He plays all over the place back there. He could play on the slot. He could play inside, outside. He could even play at safety for you. He did all of that at Texas. A real ball hawk. He had 5 interceptions this year. Really smart kid. Really a good kid. A real leader on that Texas team. I could, with the loss of Jourdan Lewis, I could see him stepping in and playing the slot, right away, and then eventually, if they were to add somebody there at that position, he'd be someone who could move all over. He's my new Earl Thomas.
Earl.
I was always for Earl.
It's not a bad comparison, yeah.
Coming out of Texas, and Earl was strictly a safety, but this is going to be my new Earl Thomas.
Well, they really look. They're in a bind in the secondary. To me, I don't see how they can't address it here in free agency, and that position's been pretty picked over already through what you've seen. In fact, of the guys who are out there, it's very thin at this point. There was a run on that position yesterday, and a lot of the guys I think would have had an interest to the Cowboys went off the board. They were too expensive. First, talk about Jourdan Lewis a little bit. After Oso Digizua, getting Jourdan Lewis back was their priority, especially with Trayvon Diggs maybe not being ready to start the season, coming back off that knee issue in surgery. But they were committed to bringing him back. But remember, this is a guy who made $2.75 million for Dallas last year. This is a player in his 8 years with the Cowboys made a little over $20 million guaranteed. And Jacksonville jumped out there and signed him to a 3-year, $30 million deal that guaranteed $20 million. So, look, I think the Cowboys were perfectly willing to double what, Jourdan Lewis made last year and tried to work something out on a 2-year deal. But once it got to 3 years and that guarantee, they were really staggered by it. But it leaves them in a bind because now the Ron Bland is the only guy you have, a proven guy who's going to be able to start the season for you. So they need a couple of corners. They will definitely pick up one in the draft, but I think they need to do another one now. Like I said, a lot of them are picked over. I would argue the best on the free agent market right now are Asante Samuel, Rasul Douglas, and a player who was here a couple of years ago who is still very good, even at the age of 34. He has defied the odds at his age to still be a very good player in Stephon Gilmore.
Yeah, and I'm always for that. It is a couple of years later, and I don't know how much he has left at this point.
But he had a good year for Minnesota last year. He really did for a guy that age.
And those are 3 guys, 3 veteran guys. Gilmore was really good here for the locker room, and
he was outstanding.
This is always an organization that needs to be looking for players like that. That was another reason why I like Barron, because he is a really quality individual.
Well, especially when they lost Jourdan Lewis, who filled that type of role for them. I mean, very well respected in the locker room, a stand-up guy, accountable, held himself accountable, held other players accountable, and just had a tremendous work ethic and performed. I mean, that is a big loss for them, one they weren't expecting.
Yeah, but you're right that that's too much money to be paying him.
If you pay a nickel corner that much money, the domino effect on where that's going to compromise you in some other spots just doesn't make sense. And look, hey, great for Jourdan Lewis. He's had an outstanding career. He's able to cash in here at the end, but this is an undersized corner who's going to turn 30 before the season starts. This contract makes him the highest paid nickel corner in NFL history. I think he's very good, but when you start getting into that stratosphere, you reluctantly have to walk away, and that's what the Cowboys did in this case.
Yes, they did. So David, you just laid out for us everything that they've done now, and then this does kind of ease up a lot of their concerns in a lot of places a little bit, just giving them some depth, if nothing else, and that's always important too, to be able to spread that around and spread that money. Obviously there's always the potential too for a trade of some sort. What is it that you think keeps Jerry from wanting to do that? He has on occasion. I mean, he traded for Gilmore, he traded for Brandon Cooks, and those were both very good moves. And sometimes I get the feeling, because we've always talked about how the reason Jerry doesn't shell out big money for free agents anymore was because of Brandon Carr. Like it was the worst thing that ever happened to the franchise, and when in reality, if Brandon Carr wasn't a great cornerback, he wasn't a bad one either. It wasn't like you just got killed on that deal.
People make that sound like he was a bust. He was at 5 years, $50 million. The price was a little rich, like it is for any very good veteran who signs in free agency. It's a little beyond what they were. He didn't get the interceptions, but he played for the 5 years, hardly missed a down, was competitive. You could match him up on the other team's top receiver and not have to give him double team help all the time. He was physical, good in the run. He was a very good, solid player, but who at that time was paid like a star. So people held him to that standard. I would argue that that contract isn't nearly as bad as people portray it to be. But remember also what happened that year. That was their last really deep draft class that they got 3 or 4 starters out of it. What were they doing that year? They were moving into a new stadium. So there was a purpose beyond just getting better on the field. Since then in that Carr contract, back in 2010, 2011, whenever it was, there's only been one player, free agent, who has made more than $6 million a season in a deal, and that was Greg Hardy back in 2015. And that was a deal where I think Jerry and Steven were enamored with the deal and making a good deal that wasn't punitive if he didn't live up to expectations more than it was the player they acquired. They were more excited about the deal than the player, and the player certainly gave them nothing to be excited about in his 1 year here.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that was he was just a bad person.
There's that too.
Yeah, that's always an issue. It doesn't seem to be that anymore. Solomon Thomas in particular.
No one will say he's a bad guy. He's an outstanding individual.
Yeah, Peyton, Man of the Year award winner, I believe. In 2018, I went out to Royal Oaks, and he was there to talk about mental health, and after he and his parents started a foundation after the suicide of his sister.
Yeah.
And a really terrific young man, and has had a nice career. Maybe not exactly what everyone thought it was going to be coming out of college, but he's been a very productive player.
Again, another example, the third player in the draft hasn't lived up to those expectations, but has been a better than average player. Now, again, when you're taking it 3, the expectation is you're a star or a perennial Pro Bowl player. He has not been that, but he has shown he has a role. And to me, it's very interesting, too, that, Aaron Whitecotton is the defensive line coach who was with the Jets, which is where Solomon Thomas came from. And if there was any doubt about his ability to contribute, he would have said, no, we can do something else here. This was clearly a guy he wanted. They believe will fit into this scheme. And like I said, I think he'll take some valuable snaps for them on the interior, gives them a little bit of a pass rush. Not as good as the run as you would like, but does give them some push in there on pass rush. Another guy very quickly is Javonte Williams. Look, Rico Dowdle had a great year. He was an undrafted player, and at this stage, you have to wonder if he's a one-hit wonder, right? I mean, everyone has a career year. Will he come close to doing that again? A lot of what he did was just out of necessity because they had nowhere else to turn, right, last year. Mm-hmm. And so I don't want to minimize the yards he got, but there is still, when you look at the body of his work, I think there's still just where does Rico Dowdle rank in the running backs in this league? Javonte Adams, Dowdle certainly had a better last year than Javonte Williams. Excuse me, I think I said Adams. Williams. But William, like I said, Dowdle was a guy who wasn't taken. Williams was taken at the top of the second round when he came into the league. He was, I think, the 35th player in the draft. Had an ACL, hasn't been as explosive since then, but is now a couple of years from there. He's a better receiver out of the backfield than Rico Dowdle. He's outstanding in pass protection, and he's a better third and short back, which I thought was one of Rico Dowdle's deficiencies last year. So as a complementary piece to the starter they will select in the draft, I think this move makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it was really bothered me to see, when you look at what his numbers are pre and post
Yeah,
ACL.
it's dramatic.
But it's as a couple years out from that, I would assume they have, done their due diligence and feel like that maybe he has, recovered somewhat from that. There's still Amari Cooper out there. Would he be somebody the Cowboys would be interested in?
Well, like I said, I think the focus will be corner and probably linebacker first, because I think they feel they can get a receiver in this draft, especially if they take one in the first 2 days, that they can plug in and would be the second receiver to CD Lamb. But, it's not just Cooper. You have Amari Cooper, Stephon Diggs, and Keenan Allen are all out there. These are veteran guys. I have not heard of any contact with Cooper at this point. My understanding is Cooper would be receptive to coming back, still has a home here. And I think temperamentally, he would be fine going into a situation where he understands he's the second receiver, not the lead receiver. He doesn't have the same uh, ego drive, I think, as a lot of the top receivers in this league. I think in fact, that's been something of a knock against him as far as being a lead receiver, that he doesn't have
Yes,
that
it has.
edge, So I think he would settle into that role perfectly fine. Outstanding route runner. You've seen he has a rapport with Dak Prescott. To me, this makes sense. I guess if you're the Cowboys, you're sitting there and you're going, okay, um, do we do this and then just get another receiver next year in the draft and use those first 3 picks on some other positions that we need, and just kind of go that way? So they're still talking through that. I think he's in the conversation, but I don't know if he's at the center of the conversation as far as to bring back. But you could do much worse than adding Amari Cooper to this roster.
Yeah, I just always have. He's been kind of the guy that I love, just because he runs such great routes, and that is not a strong point of the rest of this group,
No, it's not.
including CD Lamb. We see all the time, why aren't these guys open? Are they not scheming them open well enough? Well, some of it is they just don't run their routes well enough.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that Cooper does really well. And certainly there are some young receivers on this team and who would do well to watch Amari Cooper up close to see how he goes about his craft.
Yeah, and I think where they are at the receiver position too, and why this needs to be a serious conversation is, I believe they like the receivers they have after CD Lamb. I believe their personnel assessment of them are, these are number 3 receivers, 4 receiver, 5th receiver. I think they have doubt about whether or not they have a true second receiver on this roster behind CD Lamb. And if you got that in there, I think, in fact, I think there's some people in that building who'd actually make the argument that a true second receiver is what this offense needs more than a starting running back, as far as kind of opening things up. I think you can go either way with that. I would probably lean toward the running back, just because I like that balance between the ground game and the air. But those are the type of discussions that are going on at the Star now. So that's why, like I said, I think a Cooper will be in the mix, and Keenan Allen as well. That's certainly an intriguing guy who, is a pretty good route runner as well.
Yeah, terrific possession receiver. All right, that's going to do it for the Cowboys segment of our podcast. We're going to move over now and talk about the Rangers. And they're at this point in camp, we're getting toward the end here, and we maybe want to talk about some of the pleasant surprises out there. Evan, you're in surprise now. Give us an idea of what's going on right now.
Right now, nothing, because it's 7 a.m. out here.
Okay, now that's too literal, and you're just drawing attention to yourself. Like, oh, look, I got up early and showered earlier than I normally do.
Listen, I'll never miss a chance to
I
make
assume you
myself a
showered.
martyr. I will never miss a chance to make myself a martyr. Honestly, things are going pretty well out here. I think we talked about this some last week, Kevin. The biggest the biggest function of spring training anymore is to just get through it healthy, just like the NFL preseason is. There's not a whole ton of position battles to be had or anything like that are of significance, and it's about being healthy. And the Rangers have been primarily healthy. Wyatt Langford has come back from his little oblique issue and is hitting balls. He hit a ball yesterday that broke StatCast for about an hour because it left the bat so hard. And I couldn't believe that when they finally did tabulate it, it only came out at 107 because Corey Seager, the at bat before, had hit the ball at 113 miles an hour. So I also have my questions about whether the gun runs a little bit hot here at Surprise Stadium, but that's for another day. But he's
Seemed
come
to be
back
a lot
well.
of balls jumping off that bat fast.
Yeah, they're I'll just say this: Statcast, for the first time ever, Statcast has made spring training metrics available at all the parks out here that have two ball clubs, and for some reason, the Rangers and the Royals are 1 and 3 in exit velocity this spring. So I'm just wondering if the gun here might be calibrated a little bit hot. I don't know if that applies to the Surprise Police Department too. So I just watch your speed on Bill Road. I Adolis Garcia is supposed to play this week now after his little oblique issue. And the biggest injury concern was that Tyler Mahle was scratched yesterday with forearm soreness. The Rangers said they were just being super precautionary and that they were being ultra conservative. And as I said to GM Ross Fenstermaker, Ross, I can't tell you how many times in my career people have told me super precautionary and ultra conservative when it comes to the forearm, and I'm prepared to hear that he'll be out for the season. He laughed and smiled and said, "No, we're not sending him for an MRI at this point in time. We don't think it's that serious." He felt like he could push through it, but we felt like we've got enough time. We could skip a start here, and I think also there was some attraction to saying, "Hey, Jack Leiter, come out here and see what you can do again in another big league game on last minute notice." And Jack was mostly good, and then had a little bit of problem with command, which is the issue that Jack's faced. But he's been one of the pleasant surprises, I think, this spring, in a camp that a number of young players have really opened some eyes. So, Kevin, to all of that, I think the answer is that things have gone fairly well out here. I think anytime anybody in the Rangers organization hears that, they look for a piece of wood to knock on. But it has gone well, and uh, what we saw yesterday is that the Rangers, and we can talk a little bit about this, the Rangers took the field for the first time now as I don't know if you'd call it presumptive American League favorite, but certainly with the most projected wins now, according to Baseball Prospectus's Pacoda model, they're projected at 90.5 wins, and the Yankees, who just lost Gerrit Cole for the season, are down to 85 wins.
Yeah, I don't think there's any reason not to be optimistic about the Rangers' chances as you go forward and you look at the rotation. I know probably in a lot of Rangers fans, it's really hard to count on Jacob deGrom. He just seems like a Santa Claus. I mean, it just feels like, yeah, this guy's great. We love him, but boy, don't count on him. He always gets hurt. And and to me, and I haven't even been out there yet, but from all reports, when he pitches, he's great. I mean, it's just amazing. I don't know if I've ever seen a pitcher who is as good as, of course, or very few guys are as good as he is. When he's healthy, he's probably the best pitcher in baseball. But that's the thing. When he's healthy, he is the best pitcher in baseball. His command, his ability to come back and pitch like nothing had ever happened is just beyond anyone I've ever seen. I've never seen another pitcher anywhere close to that stature who can come back. Everybody comes back and they struggle with their time. You look at Nate Eovaldi, who doesn't have nearly the same kind of stuff that Jacob deGrom does, and Nate is a grinder. He's a guy who's going to fight, and in the course of the game, he's going to make adjustments, and you just love the mental makeup of a guy like that. But he's a guy who's always struggling, to get stuff back around. You mentioned Jack Leiter, that his 2 1/3 innings yesterday, whatever it was. The 5 strikeouts really jump out at you, but so did the 5 walks.
And really the fashion in which that all took place, because he allowed a hit and a walk and 2 walks in the first inning, got out of it with a double play, struck out the side in the second, struck out the first batter in the third, and then walked the number 9 hitter on 4 pitches, none of which were close. And I asked him about, because that is the thing, and what even stood out more for me was he ended the second inning with a strikeout against a big league hitter, in which the misses were quality misses and induced chase. And then he comes back against the number 9 hitter who has a 132 batting average and 70 big league at bats, and 4 pitches are nowhere, they're egregiously off. And he said to that he got into a habit of rushing a little bit and kind of jumping off the mound. He did dial it back enough to get a second out with a strikeout, but he also went through a stretch where there were 16 pitches thrown, 12 of them were balls, and he's still got to continue to dial that back a little bit more, get control of things better, more quickly, if he's going to be a real rotation option.
Yeah, that 9th place hitter thing drives me crazy. They're hitting there for a reason. But I remember one time Nolan Ryan said that, everybody tells you, just throw a strike, to a guy like that, right? And he goes, but we're just taught so much not to throw, when I say a strike, I'm talking about a ball over the center of the plate. He said, we're just taught not to do that. It's almost like we may do it, but it's an accident. We're never just going to throw one right down the middle. We're just constitutionally opposed to that kind of thing. But it is frustrating to watch that kind of thing happen. I do think, don't you think that the chances of Kumar Rocker and Jack Leiter starting in the opening day rotation, don't you think that seems a little far-fetched at this point?
I think both of them starting in the rotation would unfortunately require multiple injuries. I think one of them, if the Rangers do take it slow with Tyler Mahle, I think it's possible that one of them does open in the rotation. I wouldn't rule out under that scenario that both of them open up the season on the big league roster, but in that environment, I think one of them would probably have to be one of a pair of long relievers. The Rangers need probably 2 multi-inning guys, and when I say multi-inning, I'm not talking about just 2. You might need a guy who's capable of going 3 once or maybe even twice a week. Because, look, you're going to have DeGrom, and I don't expect DeGrom to throw more than 75 pitches in an outing in April. And if Mahle is healthy, you're going to have Mahle out there, and he's going to be monitored pretty closely too. So you're going to have to piggyback some guys with multi-inning guys.
We have not talked about Jake Burger, and I'm really intrigued by him. I thought when Chris Young made that deal that seemed like a really under the radar kind of move. It really didn't get a lot of traction nationally. People looked at it even like, well, Nate Lowe's OPS is really better than his. And I don't know. And I don't want to, take anything away from what Nate did for the Rangers and helping them to win a World Series. But, he's an opposite field hitter essentially, and soft contact at that, and struggled to hit fastballs. And so am I wrong to think that Jake Burger could be on the precipice of a 40 home run type seasons in the coming years?
No, I said to somebody yesterday that I don't rule out, and I'm trying to figure out who it was that I said that to, but I said it to somebody at camp yesterday that I think the conditions are right for Burger to get to 40 home runs. And let me just lay this out a little bit. He hit 30 home runs each of the last 2 seasons. Last year, the entire season, he was dealing with knowing that his daughter, Penelope, was going to be born with Down syndrome. And that, I think the Burgers have handled this and are, with what they're going to do with their family foundation, which we'll write about soon, have done a remarkable job on how they've handled it. But still, when you know that your child is going to be born with a life-changing condition, that's a lot of added anxiety. The Marlins were not a good team. He's not played for a good team because he played for Chicago before that. The two guys that he really was able to lean on last year were Skip Schumacher and Luis Ureta, who are now with the Rangers. Skip as a special assistant to Chris Young, and Luis Ureta as the bench coach. He is a fastball hitter. He's going to have a lineup around him that should be stronger, and so I just think that from every element. The other part of this too is this guy had so many injuries early in his career. It did take some time for him to find his footing. He's healthy. He's got a good support system around him, and I think he's got a great approach. And so yeah, I think it would not surprise me if Jake Burger leads this team in home runs in 2025.
Yeah, and that would make a huge difference for this team to have a right-handed power like that, and from the first base position, because the Raiders haven't gotten a lot of production out of that position since Mark Teixeira. I mean, you have to go back a long ways to get consistently good production from the position, and I know that that first base isn't what it used to be. It used to be a position where a lot of teams had
Right.
power there, and it just doesn't seem to happen as much anymore. But you can't really tell on this kind of thing what that might be the case. So, Evan, just real quickly in the time we got left in this Rangers segment, when we talk about if the Rangers really are one of the favorites in the American League, obviously that starts in the division where, as we've talked about before, the Astros have lost some significant talent. Seattle really hasn't done a lot to replace or to augment its offense. Got great pitching, but not a lot there. Who else in the American League do you feel like might be a challenger at this point?
Well, I think you can't overlook Baltimore, and you can't, Boston did add Bregman, and I think Bregman's going to have a resurgent year in Boston with the Green Monster. And the Red Sox did pick up Gerrit Cole, which is a pretty significant pitching pick, and he'll probably pitch against the Rangers on opening day. And you know, I think it's not going to be a runaway race for the Rangers in the American League by any stretch, or in the American League West, I should say. But as we just mentioned, right, the Astros lost Alex Bregman. They lost Kyle Tucker. They've lost Justin Verlander. That's three pretty big faces to replace. Seattle, as you said, Kevin, relies on its starting pitching, and George Kirby is going to open the season on the IL there, and who knows how long that's going to take. So they didn't do anything to their offense, and they're relying on the starting pitchers. And for the first time in 2 years, they may have some real issues there in terms of health. So I do think that the Rangers, in my mind, I would put them at this point probably a presumptive favorite in the American League West, and that might be a more than 3-game margin. As far as the entire league goes, I do think it's pretty open. I do think that there are a number of teams in that upper tier, but for what the Rangers did this offseason, and Berger was just the tip of the iceberg, I guess.
Oh.
Okay, this whole segment's just been a lead up to that. Okay.
But for what they've done, I think the Rangers have been really targeted, and I think they have addressed a number of their concerns. And I do also just want to say, in one sentence, there have been a number of young players who, to this point, have really showed up well in spring training, from Mark Church and Emiliano Teodo to Alejandro Osuna, to Leiter and the last start by Rocker. All have been really encouraging for the Rangers to think that there's going to be depth in the system from which they can pull from.
Okay, William Faulkner didn't have sentences that long, okay?
Wow, we're going with the literary shots now. Okay, cool. Real quick before we get out, real quick summation there. Is Teodo got any shot at all at making the opening day roster?
I don't think so. I think right now there's a debate in camp. Do we send him back to AAA and let him start down there? Because the way he's pitching, if he can carry that velocity and command deeper into games, he could be a real middle of the rotation type starter. Or do you send him back there and let him continue to relieve? I think they're only going to be able to carry at max one inning optionable pitcher. And I think right now Church probably has the inside track on that just because he's a little bit older and was up last year. But I do think that both Emiliano Teodo and Mark Church are going to pitch high leverage innings for the Rangers at some point in time this year. They will contribute to this team.
Yeah. Okay. That's going to do it for the Rangers segment of our podcast. We're going to move over now and talk a little bit about the Mavericks, and so we'll start with something that I wrote for. It'll be in, I guess, tomorrow's paper. It's online now. Basically, I wrote this column just because Michael Hogue came up with this unbelievable illustration of the 4 local GMs all on bicycles in a race, and it's hilarious. And it's it's interactive, or I guess whatever we want to call it. It's in motion. And it's just hilarious. And so I thought, well, what the heck? I'm happy to write about that because there's always something to write about these GMs.
Nico, I was on the graphic. Nico, I believe, was in the lead before he got knocked back, and that's interesting to see that
by a certain player running across the track. So yeah, that was pretty good stuff. It's funny in this market. Before that happened, we had before the Luka trade, we had 3 GMs here as good as any GMs in anywhere, right, in any market. Because Chris Young is just 2 years removed from a World Series championship and has continued to make moves to keep the team's options or keep them afloat. He could have very easily have just said after last year, well, the offense just had an off year and they'll bounce back, and that's not what he did at all. Went out and added a couple of guys who could hit fastballs and added. He's very good at building on the fly in the bullpen, and so Chris is very impatient. Extreme competitor,
He's
might
an
say.
Extreme competitor, Kevin. But the juxtaposition for me, right, is you look at all the moves the Rangers made this winter, and there is logic behind them. You could see the targeted reasons that they were trying to make those moves and what they addressed, even to the point where the low trade allowed them to shed some money after they had gotten Berger, so they had first base covered, and they were able to add what they think will be a late inning reliever. And what I keep coming back to a month later on the Doncic trade is I'm still looking for a logical reason that adds up here for why that was made.
Yeah, no real. I mean, that's Nico's logic. There is some. I was so struck by the comment, the statement released by the Mavericks after Kyrie Irving's injury and wiped out the rest of this season and about a third of next season for him, at least, in which Nico just waxed poetic about Kyrie and what kind of player he is and our heart and soul, and he's cut from the same cloth as Kobe Bryant. And these were all the things that when you put those against everything that's leaked out from the organization about Luka Doncic since that trade, and even before the trade, actually, we were hearing some of these things that were really negative. The contrast between these two players and what was being said about them is just unbelievable. I mean,
it's like Nico's worldview stems directly from his relationship with Kobe Bryant and what a competitor he was. And because a guy who came from Europe has a different sort of mindset than a guy who, grew up here. I mean, it's just, but I was struck when I saw Kobe mentioned in that release, because that was actually the specter of Kobe was part of the reason why Luka's no longer here. And why is the general manager here tying every single decision he makes or compliment back to Kobe Bryant? It's just, that seems unhealthy to me.
Well, it is unhealthy, and it just tells you everything about what we're just talking about. You it's like someone, I guess you said, you can't get mad at your money with your money. And Nico got mad with his talent. No, Luka's not that kind of talent. He's not Kobe Bryant. He's not anybody. That's the thing about Luka, is that who's been like him? He actually has been compared by people when he first came into the league to LeBron because of the size and the fact that he kind of imposes his will and his court vision and all of those kind of things. And those are very similar. But I've never seen another player like Luka. I mean, I tried to compare him at one point to Oscar Robertson, and when I asked Jerry West that question directly, he said, "Oh no, that Oscar Robertson could never shoot like Luka. He
Yeah.
never had that kind of range, even anywhere, anything close to it. So, this was just a different kind of player. And in my mind, Nico just has a very narrow view of what he wants from players or a player, and Luka just was outside of that. And so therefore I just, he doesn't want to deal with that. I like an organization having an identity for the kind of players it wants, and I think that really helps you as you go through drafts and free agency and things. And maybe you can make moves that other teams wouldn't, and it allows you to build the kind of roster you want to build. But when you've got a generational player, you just say, well, we have to set that aside, and we have to learn how to deal with this.
It is amazing that we are a month out, right? And we've done any number of podcasts, and I don't think we are alone. But no matter when we dive into the Mavericks, it just comes back to the same thing over and over again. Like, it's just three guys sitting around saying, how could they make this trade? And it's the entire city doing the same thing. We are 5 weeks out from this deal, and there has still been nothing that lines up to say, even if it didn't work out, I could see the logic or the reason behind this. I mean, I think everybody thought this is exactly what's going to happen. Maybe not the ancillary injuries, but we did not think that this was going to be productive for the Mavs, did we?
No. And I wanted to ask you, David, what you think about this, because in my mind, after Kyrie got hurt, well, that was it. They're on the bubble now anyway, and then people felt like, well, once Anthony Davis comes back, and if Gafford or Derek Lively comes back as well, then they'll be a good team, and then they'll get in the play in, and then they can make a little bit of a run here. Well, without Kyrie Irving, and frankly, here was another screw up by Nico when he traded Quentin Grimes to Philadelphia for Caleb Martin, which kept him from, because of the contract. It's a very complicated thing, but they're very close to the level of what they can replace. They are unable to sign another player because they're so close to that limit. And had they kept Quentin Grimes, not only would he be a much better scoring option from the backcourt than Caleb Martin is. He's not even a backcourt player, which is exactly what they need now. They could have signed some, a couple of 10-day contracts.
Well, now they're running guys through here on 10-day contracts, and they can't keep them. They can't sign them because they don't have the money to sign them. So there have been one or two of these guys that performed pretty well. They would have signed them for the rest of the year, but they just don't have the financial wherewithal to do it. This was. Again, as soon as you had the injuries, especially when Nico put this in the time frame of a win now move, it totally fell apart, even beyond the slim pillar he tried to build the trade on, how this made the team better in the short term. But now the question is, without Kyrie, they can't make any type of significant run. Whether or not they even make a play-in game is in question at this point. But now you're faced with the question of, okay, do you want Lively back? Do you want Anthony Davis back? Do you want them on the floor to start to build and get at least a little bit of a look of what you'll be? Or do you just say, look, guys, don't even worry about it. We'll hit the court running next season. So it's a position they found themselves in a couple of years ago when they infamously acknowledged they were tanking. Is this team just going to pack it in now and go for a draft pick in a lottery spot versus a potential play-in game?
Yes, that would be my vote, because here's the thing. This was going to be considered a big-time draft. It is not really working out that way. The depth of it is not quite what everybody thought it was going to be. But the closer you get to the top of that draft, the better at this point, clearly. And I don't think we need to see Anthony Davis come back. We know that Anthony Davis can play. Look, he's a good player when he's healthy. The question is just whether he's going to be healthy or not. I think the sooner this season is over and they remove themselves from the conversation and public view, the better. This is just better for everybody's psyche if this season would just come to an end, and that is that. We can just move on as an as a city and as an organization. I think it would be really good for the Mavericks to do that.
Well, you say move on. How deep do the Lakers go in the playoffs?
Well, exactly. That's the other part of all this. And we have said this over and over again. And Evan and I have talked about this as well. It doesn't matter how many titles the Mavericks win. It's how many will the Lakers win with Luka. And I have even seen, we ran a story the other day from someone who's worked with the Mavericks and in a PR standpoint, he
Yep.
wrote a column for us in which he said that he's heard from fans who say, I would rather lose with Luka than win with Anthony Davis. What does that tell you about the appeal of that young man in this market? And probably that's not a healthy thing to say about your fan base either, that they would rather lose with one player than not. But I think it does accurately describe this fan base. That is how it runs. When you've been in a market where basketball's only been here, professional basketball, for 45 years.
45, yeah.
That's not a real, deep background. Most of these people have grown up with the Mavericks, if you're our age, certainly. And secondly, it's not exactly a winning franchise either, right? One NBA title in those 45 years. Made a run last year, and 2 years before that, it was nice. Of course, those with Luka, for a guy for the GM who wants to win now, and I guess getting to the finals and getting to the
But
Western
they've had
Conference
3
finals
trips
is
to
not
the
enough.
finals, right, in the last 20 years. That's pretty decent.
Well, it's okay, but it's not like what my point is that it's not enough to make you think you're not the Celtics, you're not the Lakers, you're not the
No,
Bulls,
but I mean,
you're not the Heat. You're not an organization that, look, this is what we do, we win.
yeah, that was just I was
stick
just
with
off
us.
on a tangent. To your point, you're exactly right. I mean, the connection, and we've been over this before too. The connection of Luka, and the basketball genealogy that it runs through, is immense, and it was a horrible miscalculation by people who had not spent a whole lot of time in the Dallas market, to not understand that. And I don't know, I think that fans, if this team wins with Anthony Davis before the Lakers win with Luka, I think that's some degree of reprieve for ownership and management. I don't see that happening, but the thing, Kevin, you and I have said on one podcast that never got dropped because of our service, and on one that did, that look, the grade on this trade is not going to be, do you win a championship with Anthony Davis? It's, do you win more championships with this group than the Lakers win with Luka? And that's an impossible bar to clear. It's just impossible.
Wow.
Well, because
And so
once
it
Anthony
was,
Davis steps down, Luka's going to be playing another 5 to 8 years. And so they're going to, every year he's on the court, that team's going to have a chance. I mean, he's already gone to the conference finals and finals with teams no one envisioned would get that far. So there's, it's not just he's entertaining and people have a connection with him. He has a pretty good body of work. No, he hadn't won a title, but he certainly gives you the indication you're on the edge of your seat. You're about to get one.
God bless Tom Grieve. I love Tom Grieve. He never lived down Sammy Sosa for Harold Baines. Okay. And Sammy Sosa only blossomed after he left the Rangers. This is going to be worse. I mean, we're going to
Yes.
cite, providing we have history, we're going to, in history, cite this trade as one of the worst in basketball history.
Well, it's certainly the worst one in this market. There's never been a trade worse in this market.
No.
Worst received. It is. And look, when from the outset it looks bad. That's how you know. There are lots of trades that get made, and you think, well, maybe this will work out. I don't know. But this is not going to be one of those. I should say before we get out of here that we didn't even mention Jim Nill and the job he did with Mikko Rantanen, the big time acquisition he made, and to push the Stars ahead here. Jim Nill has done a fabulous job as a GM of the Stars. He seems to be, to me, 1 or 2 steps ahead of the entire rest of the NHL in moves that he makes. I think he's certainly helped by an owner who wants to win. Tom Ghilardi really is pushed for that. He has at times felt like the franchise was not being well run, and he made some big time changes, and Jim Nill was one of those, and he has really come forward fast in doing that. He's been able to do it the Howie Roseman way. He drafts well. He's once again made a big time deal here. He makes deals around the sides. He does a little bit of everything well, and that's what's going to serve them, the Stars, very well going forward. They may end up being the dominant team in that building. Certainly they will be in the short term. All right, that's going to do it for our podcast this week. We thank you for coming in and sitting down with us for a little while. We'll be back next week with more. Evan and I will be out there doing it from Surprise, and then I don't think David's going to join us out there, but he'll be with us.
I was invited. I would.
From his bedroom, I think he'll be glad to do that. So from everybody here to everybody out there, thanks, and we'll see you next time.